Hey, it's McDev. We are going to go over functions, and we're going to go from very basic into an intermediate understanding of functions, a functional understanding of functions, if you would. Level 1, a function is a collection of code that runs only when you ask it to. So here we have created a function. We're starting off by calling it a function, then we have the name, and we can make this whatever we want it to. Then, of course, you have the parentheses, and then we have the bracket. And inside the bracket is where the function actually does something. And so in here, it says, see, I told you so. So what do you think is going to happen if we run this function? So it's saying, I won't do anything unless you ask me to. Have we asked it to do anything? Let's find out. We run the code, and nothing's happening. So how do we call a function? How do we ask a function to run? Well, we do it by saying its name. And so we'll say, I won't do anything unless you ask me to. And so this is asking the function to run. And so we press run again. It says, see, I told you so. So here we have an example where we have created this function. And even though we created it, it's not going to do anything unless we ask it to. And the cool part about this is we can ask it to do it however many times we want to. And so if we press run again, what do you think is going to happen now? Is it just going to run one time, or is it going to run 4 times? Well, let's just find out. It's always better to press run and see what the output is rather than assuming. So here we see that it ran 4 times. Great. So that's level 1, is that a function's only going to run when you ask it to. Okay, so level 2 is we can hand stuff over to the function to use. All right, so here we have a function preceded by the word function, which tells the computer, hey, this is a function. And it's called tell me what to say. And inside these parentheses is the section where we pass it things, where we're handing it this function things to use. And so here it says, thanks for telling me. And then we've got, this is the whole template literal thing. And then we have the variable that we're passing in, which is what to say. And so here, we're not actually going to use this as an example yet. So here, if we call the function, tell me what to say. If we call it just like this, what do we think is going to happen? Well, let's find out. Okay, so thanks for telling me, and then undefined. Like, okay, well, sorry, I guess I could have done better than that. So how are we going to tell this function or hand this function information here? Well, the way we do it is by when we call the function, we put it inside the parentheses. And so here, in this case, we're going to tell the function to say aardvark. So we hit run. And it says, thanks for telling me aardvark. Cool. And then we can actually pass in multiple things. And I'm just going to say, what to say again? I don't know. And I'm going to have 2 console logs. The great thing about copy and paste is it saves time. The bad thing is it copies your mistakes too. All right, so now let's say if I call this, well, it says, thanks for telling me aardvark, and then it says, thanks for telling me what to say again. It doesn't say anything here, it says undefined again. So how are we going to give it 2 things? How are we going to pass it 2 items? Well, just like we created them up here twice, we're going to say it down here twice. Kiwi. And so now it's going to say, hey, thanks for telling me what to say, or thanks for telling me aardvark, and thanks for telling me kiwi. So that's level 2. And this is an important level to try to grasp here. It's a little bit tricky, but essentially this right here, and when we call the function, we're passing it something. And then up here where it says inside of these is where it catches what we've passed it. And we can call it passing it different things. Star Wars and Star Trek. And here we see we can just pass in different things. And so we're going to go ahead and move on now to lesson 3. Functions can hand us stuff too. So here we have a function that says, my purpose is to give you the number 9. And everything basically looks similar to what we've seen before, except now we have this new word, return. And after return, we have the number 9. And so if we console log this whole function, we just say console log function, what's going to happen? Well, this function is going to give us something. It's going to give us the number 9. And so what we would expect is that when we console log, there we have it. It gives us the number 9. So here we go. We create a variable called 10, and we can just add the function to the number 1. And so then if we console log 10, what would we expect? Well, 9 plus 1 is 10. Cool. And so that's really level 3. And there's a lot of uses for this return statement, and but this is just sort of a basic example of how it's used. So we're going to go ahead and move on to level 4. All right, what happens in a function stays in a function? Okay, so we have this variable described right here. It says outer scope, I live outside the brackets. This is what the variable is called. This is the value. And here we have our function called allaboutScope. And inside the function, we're creating a variable. And when I say inside the function, an easy way to think about it is that we're inside these brackets. And then inside the function, I'm going to console log the outer scope variable and the inner scope variable. So we press run. And I was expecting something to happen. Oh, well, maybe you could tell me what happened at this point. Why did we not get the output from this? Well, you might have noticed that we never actually asked the function to run. So we're going to call the function using its name, and now we'll see the output. I live outside the brackets. I live inside the brackets. Cool. So now let's say, now that we're out, let's say we're outside of the function and we want to access this variable right here called inner scope. So what would happen if we tried to console log the inner scope from outside the function? Well, let's find out. Ooh, we get a nasty error. It says inner scope is not defined. So here, we can see it at least printed I live outside the brackets. It can access this just fine, but it can't access this at all. And so really, the general rule in JavaScript is what's created inside of brackets, think of like if statements, for loops, and stuff. What's created inside the brackets stays in the brackets. And what's created outside of the brackets is available everywhere from the outside and also on the inside of the brackets. And so that's what we call scope. So now let's say if we really wanted to access this whole inner scope variable thing. Well, let's see an example here. So I'm just going to pull this down so we can see it better. Okay. So we have the outer scope variable and we have the inner scope variable, but this time we're using the return statement that you might remember before. And so here we're going to say console log, and we're just going to say accessing the data inside the function through a return, and then we're going to print out the value from the function. And this is using a template literal, which you can probably see a little better that way. We'll press run. Ooh, I have a typo somewhere. Let me see where it's at. I live outside the brackets. Ah, I had created the same variable twice. Great, so what we see was output. is we have the variable printing out, I live inside the brackets. So through a return statement, we were able to access this variable that we couldn't access otherwise. Because remember, if we were to try to console log, from outside the function, the inner scope, we'll get an error. But if we call the function and we get it from the return statement, well, the function is handing us that variable that otherwise would be kind of trapped inside it. So I hope that makes sense. And with that, we're going to continue on with the last part, putting it all together. So here is what's often used as an introductory example for functions. We have adding two numbers. And so here we have the name function, the name of the function, and then we have the two parameters. That's what these things are called, our parameters. And we have the first number and the second number. And then inside the brackets, we do things with these values. I created a variable that says, hey, we'll take the first number and we'll add it to the second number. And then we're going to return those two. So we're going to return the first number plus the second number. So now using what you've learned, if I were to console log add two numbers, what would that give me? Well, let's find out. Not a number. Sort of an error, but not quite. It's not giving us really anything useful because we never handed it something to work with. So we need to pass it values that it can add. And so now if we give it these two things, it's going to pass in the 1, and it's going to pass in the 9, and then it's going to add 1 plus 9, and it's going to return those two. So let's go ahead and run it. And I have an error. Let's see. I just had a typo. Let's press run, and it gives us 10. And if we do these other ones, this will give us 7, that will give us 5. Awesome. Or not 5, 5 plus 5, which is 10. And so here we are handing the function values, and it's giving us back the result. So there's a whole lot more to learn and discover when it comes to functions. In newer JavaScript, we have these things called arrow functions. When dealing with asynchronous things like an API, we have asynchronous functions. There's a lot more to learn. However, this is a really good starting point. And just as an example of what this function up here could look like, if we reduce it down into an arrow function, it could look something like this. And while you don't really need to worry about this just yet, I'll explain it to you briefly. Here we have the name of the variable, because we're storing this as a constant. And then it equals, and then we have the sort of arrow function syntax. So we have the parameters, just like we have here. And we have first number, and we have second number. And then we're returning, with this arrow statement, the first number plus the second number. And so if you come across arrow functions when you're on Stack Overflow or other things like that, that's basically how they work. There's more to them. Anyways, I don't want to go any further than this. I hope you learned a lot, and have a great day. Bye.